Ahlan wa sahlan, marhaban. Hi everybody. Welcome to UC Davis's Shields Library courtyard on a beautiful spring day, and I am very happy to kick off next month's library book talk on Arab American Heritage Month. Not only is this the very first time we've covered Arab American Heritage Month, I believe this is the first April where it's actually an officially recognized federal month. So I was very excited to have the opportunity to go through our rich collection, some of which you can see behind me in principle, and find some interesting items from our collections which demonstrate not only the scope and rigor and sheer interestingness of a lot of the scholarship and other creative outputs that sort of obtain around the Arab American experience, but also our own library's rich collections. I've been collecting for the Middle Eastern South Asian Studies program here at Davis for quite a number of years, and have had the good fortune to work with amazing students, amazing researchers, amazing faculty, and amazing collections. So I went through the stacks and was able to pull out some titles which I think will probably be somewhat of interest for you as you look into exploring Arab American heritage next month in April. So first up, I should tell you this first book I picked is called The Making of Arab Americans. As always, when you have hyphenated Americans, it's always an interesting academic question or a scholarly question or social question as to how they got that way. This is a very recent book published by UT Austin by Hani Bawardi. It is specifically focused on Syrian nationalism and U.S. citizenship, but it does sort of situate the Arab American experience in a lot of hyphenated American experiences. People who came to the United States and they became, quote, hyphenated Americans, and the process by which they got there can be an interesting one. One thing that tends to be overlooked, although it shouldn't be, is that the Arab American experience is one of long standing. I mean, it's not just something that's happened in the last 10 years. You can see here, this was my personal fave, just for covers. I should hold it closer so you can see. It's called Arab Roots, Pathways to Syrian California. So you can see as a UC campus, we sort of are obligated and happy to collect interesting scholarship that is relevant to California and the land grant mission of the university. What they call Syrian Americans is kind of a misnomer. Often in the 19th century, Syrians referred to any Arab populations that came from what they used to call the Levant. So historical Transjordania, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, those territories of the Ottoman Empire that had an Arab majority population. So again, this is sort of social history, cultural history, and sort of looks at how the Arab American communities sort of came to be Californian and where we are at in this case. This is something that's probably extended back 160, 170 years or so. A lot of the contemporary American experience is, of course, one of immigrant communities, and the sort of the contextualization around the immigrant experience or the, quote, new American experience is often intensely local. And so while we go from the big broad state of California over 150 years, we can look more narrowly at communities that are existing in New York right now. So this is Arab New York by Emily Regan Wills, Politics and Community and the Everyday Lives of Arab Americans. So again, we're looking at a book that's got a much more contemporary sociological, ethnographic focus. Who's in the community? How do they relate to one another? How do they relate to the broader community? What's happening? And because, I should say, these are all sequenced. Arab American is really a broad category. I mean, there are a lot of, the Arabic world, as defined, is not a Muslim or a Christian or any other kind of religious community. It's ultimately a community of speakers of Arabic. And the Arab world extends from Morocco, Mauritania, all the way on the west coast of Africa, across North Africa, and as far east as into Iran, and even maybe a little bit further east. And certainly there's an Arabic diaspora all over the world, but the communities from which the Arab American stem can be as broadly based as Egyptians, as Moroccans, as Tunisians, Libyans, Nigerians from Chadians, Sudanese, of course, Palestinians, Jordanians, Syrians, etc., Arab minorities in Turkey, etc. So you can see that sometimes we'll have to focus on a much more narrowly defined community, in this case the Palestinian communities of Chicago, which is another UC Press title by Loren D. Lybarge. And again, this is really sort of documenting the here and now. What's happening in these communities? Who are they? How do they relate to one another? What social bonds do they have? What have they brought with them? How are they active in their communities? And how are their communities defined? When we get to the Palestinian experience and moving away from sort of contemporary social science, a classic work of the Arab American experience is, and this one's a little dirty, you can tell it's been used a lot, is the great critic and scholar Edward Said's memoir called Out of Place, which documents his journey from the Near East, from Palestine and Egypt before the Second World War to the United States, and his intellectual trajectories and social trajectories and cultural trajectories along the way. Again, it's sort of the one book that I figured I would have to mention, because it is by far the most prominent Arab American self-documentation, and it's a great book, and you can tell that it's been checked out a lot. We should probably get a new copy. It's dirty. Moving to my own reading list. Mostly I've been talking about books that I have read or have looked at or maybe purchased or thought about purchasing or thought about reading. This was a book I read just for fun. This is something, not even for fun. This is a book by Elaine Mokhtefi, Algiers, Capital of the Third World, which is sort of, it's a kind of a ringer. This is not an author who is herself an Arab American. It does document a path of radical engagement with the Black Panthers, moving from California in the 1960s to Algiers, which was, as the subtitle indicates, capital of the Third World. And it just reminds us that the Arab American experience is not necessarily one of economic and political refugees, people going from their own country to the United States because they have to for whatever reason. It really does document a world in which the Arab world is the destination, as the utopian site of promise, and how inspiring that was for a generation of radicals all over the world, and several generations. So, and it's a fascinating book. It's just terrific. I think this is a new edition. So this is Elaine Mokhtefi's Algiers, Capital of the Third World. And then finally, because we all like to have some fun reading, I'd like to talk about the Hakawati, which is Arabic for the storyteller, by Lebanese-American writer Rabih Alameddine, who lives in San Francisco. And those of you who are active on social media may be familiar with his Twitter account, because it is one that is constantly reposted. But this itself is a lovely, lovely, lovely sort of modern, I don't want to call it Scheherazade, but it's certainly a metafictional, postmodern fictional adoption or adaptation of the sort of the fabulesque in the Arabic literary tradition, from the 1001 Nights to Scheherazade to just all the ways in which fiction can imbricate and curl back on and coil back on itself. So the Arab American experience as well is not just community activists or economic people coming to the new world for a better opportunity. It is about art and creativity and taking the traditions that you grew up with and that you're deeply rooted in and turning them into something new from the vantage point of another literary tradition, or one that is deeply rooted in your own native tradition. That's 7 books for now. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for coming to the library. Hope you come in and check these books out. I'm going to put them back so they can be checked out again as soon as I'm done talking to you, and have a wonderful Arab American Heritage Month next month. Thanks.